want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot?
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
This week, we'll recap Tuesday's wild presidential debate from a Mississippi perspective. Magnola Tribune's Russ, Latino, and State Senator John Horhn offer their thoughts. We'll also hear from the parties themselves. Mississippi GOP Chairman Mike Hurst and State Democratic Chair Cheikh consider what's still to come in an embittered presidential campaign. That's all ahead this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thanks for joining us for this September 15th edition of Insight. Quips, insults, insinuations, fabrications. Toss in a few studio cameras and a sprinkle of fact-checking, and you have the making of a televised presidential debate in the 21st century. There was a lot of action and drama on display in Philadelphia last Tuesday night as Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump squared off. It will likely be their first and only debate. Harris wants a second. Trump says he does not. But the real question is, did either candidate change enough minds to break their political stalemate? That was the question in mind Tuesday night as we analyze the debate. Here's State Senator John Horhn and Magnola Tribune's Russ Latino with myself and Melanie Christopher. Your thoughts on how this debate went tonight?
It was a draw. Yeah, I think that they both scored some hits, but neither came with the knockout punch.
Russ, now you wrote about the debate being how the vice president really needed to emerge from President Biden's shadow. How did she do?
I think you heard over and over again she used the phrase turn the page. I counted at least half a dozen times she talked about turning the page. I think she recognizes that being tied to President Biden is a liability for her given Biden's poor approval ratings right now, some of the concerns around inflation, the crisis at the border. And so I think there's a real effort underway in that campaign to politely step back or away from the Biden presidency. That's going to be hard to do because I think most Americans realize it was the Biden-Harris administration. I agree with Senator Horhn, though. There were no knockout punches tonight. They're competing really for a very small handful of votes and a very small handful of states. And I think because of that, there's a certain level of risk aversion that you don't want to say the thing or take the swing that ultimately takes you out of the game.
John, Harris came with a lot of critical points on Trump. She was trying to get him on the COVID pandemic and also his handling of abortion rights. How did she do well on those issues, or what did she do?
I would say this. I think that Kamala Harris came out and she looked presidential. That's a question I think a lot of folks have had. The abortion issue and her responses regarding that, I believe, were her strongest points. She did score some points on coming with a plan that was specific in terms of what she wants to do for the middle class, and I think that might have resonated a little bit. But you know, by and large, they both stuck to their scripts.
Let's briefly get your takes, both of your takes, on who scored on the big issues. Let's talk about economy.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you're looking at the economy, it's hard-pressed not to give Trump the advantage right now. The polling suggests that he has the advantage on the economy, and some of that's just a byproduct of the fact that people are going to the grocery store and they're paying 30% more than they paid for 4 years ago. And it's hard for somebody who's trying to make those bills meet at the end of the month to reconcile that. And so I think Trump wins on the economy.
John?
Well, I think that Harris won on the abortion question. I think that she resonated a bit with regard to saying to the middle class, here's what I'm going to do for you. And the president was high on rhetoric, former president was high on rhetoric in terms of what he has done in terms of the economy, but he wasn't long on specifics.
The president hit her on immigration, and that's a sore spot for her on the immigration issue. Did he do what he had to do on the immigration?
I think so. I mean, I think most people recognize it polls as the #2 issue behind the economy right now in the country. There's been a record run on the border. You're seeing violent gangs from Venezuela take over towns. You're certainly seeing crime like the crime that happened in Pontotoc, where a young boy was raped by an illegal immigrant recently, or at least charged twice with the rape of a young boy. Those kinds of stories resonate with regular people, and I think the fact is that border crisis didn't get elevated and escalated to the point that it's at until the Biden administration was in place. It's a real liability for Kamala Harris.
Energy, she talked about fracking.
Well, the former president talked about fracking a lot more,
Well,
I think, because they were in Pennsylvania, and that's a big issue up there. And also, I think he just wanted to hit her on it. And as far as how she did with regard to energy and the global warming issue, I think she acquitted herself fairly well.
It's beyond dispute, though, that at one point in 2018, 2019, and 2020 even, she did recommend banning fracking. She signed on to the Green New Deal. She was a co-sponsor of a bill with AOC on climate equity. Those sorts of things do hurt her. And so what you saw in the debate was her trying to, what Bill Clinton called triangulate, away from more extreme positions and to present herself as more moderate on those issues like gun control, like the border. The question is whether or not the American public will buy that.
I mean, they're in Pennsylvania. Does this change anything? Does this move everybody in Pennsylvania or work? Because basically Pennsylvania's a tie.
You look at Pennsylvania, it's a tie. Arizona's a tie. Georgia's a tie. North Carolina's a tie.
It's so close.
We're talking about a race that is going to come down to tens of thousands of votes instead of millions of votes. So you'll have 150 million people vote, but it's going to be 50 to 80,000 people in those key states that ultimately decide this election, which is why you do hear something like fracking brought up in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. You know, and I think that neither of the candidates scored a big win tonight. They held steady, and they fought to a tie. Harris, I think, if there's a win, she did acquit herself well, and I think that the American people got to know her a little bit better.
She was the one that people really did not know, and they kept saying, I don't really know anything.
And I would agree with that. The New York Times poll said that 31% of the American public wanted to know more about her. I think there was criticism. Can she stand on her own 2 feet and do an interview, do a debate? I think at a minimum she did that tonight.
She did that. All right, gentlemen, thank you both so much for being with us and adding a lot to our commentary here.
We'll be talking to you much more as this gets closer to the election day. After the break, we'll check in with the top cheerleaders in Mississippi for each presidential candidate, Cheikh Taylor and Mike Hurst. We're back in a moment. History and polling suggests that Mississippi will remain solidly in the Republican camp in November's presidential election, but leaders in either party are taking nothing for granted, not in an election with such a razor-thin margins. We spoke with Mississippi Democratic Party Chairman Cheikh Taylor Friday, but first, here's Mississippi GOP Chairman Mike Hurst. We caught up with him at a debate watch party Tuesday night.
Well, I think it came across clear to the American public. No one in this country is better off today than they were when President Trump was in office. And I think that's what people need to take away. Kamala Harris talked about all the things she's going to do if she's elected president, but Donald Trump told the American public at the very end of the debate, why haven't you done it in the last 3.5 years? We need to look at the runaway inflation. We need to look at the unsecured border. We need to look at the escalating crime in this country. That's what the Harris-Biden administration has given us over the last 3.5 years, and that's what she'll do if she's elected.
How do you feel that Trump did on just sticking to do you feel like he stuck to the policy? I know it's one thing that people are saying that if he does that, then he has a greater chance of getting the undecided voters. But what did you see?
Yeah, I did see that. I saw he talked to the American public about what he did when he was president. He told them what he's going to do again. He's going to make the country safer, not just inside of our country, but from external threats to our country. He's going to shut down our border and secure our border. He's going to make sure that wages go up and the prices that we as Americans are facing go down.
What are your thoughts on what you heard about fracking?
Well, I don't know where Kamala Harris stands. It depends on the day you ask. Somebody mentioned that if her nose grew an inch, it'd already be to the Gulf of Mexico. Fracking is important to our country. It's important that we be energy independent, and it's clear from all the data, despite what she said tonight, it's clear that she's against fracking.
And you mentioned that you didn't know where she stands, and I think that a lot of American voters weren't sure who she was coming into tonight's debate. Did she help people understand who she was?
Well, I think you can tell a person by their actions. And over the last 3.5 years, again, she's run our country into the ground. And what she continues to tell the American public is her values have not changed. And I think the American public need to remember, over the last 3.5 years, our country has declined, and it's because of the values that Kamala Harris holds.
How do you feel about this debate compared to the one that folks saw back in July? I know that President Biden stepped down. How did it feel comparing the two?
Well, it's different because obviously President Biden was not there mentally. Kamala Harris, I think some would say she wasn't really there mentally, but it's a different debate. But what I think matters again is the policy. The Republicans stand for policies that the American people value, that is going to make the American lives better, and the Democrats are about opening up our border, taking away our guns, and making us less safe. I think the difference, one of the key differences between Republican policies and Democrat policies is the Democrats want to give everyone government money. They want to take taxes from the American people and then redistribute it to other people. Republicans, we want people to keep their money. We want lower taxes and we want a smaller government. I think that's the fundamental difference between the two parties.
And so we're just a few days past what may be the only Harris-Trump debate of the campaign. Do you think the vice president accomplished what she needed to on Tuesday night?
Without a doubt. She showed herself to be presidential, showed herself to have strength to actually challenge Donald Trump, to walk across the stage, to shake his hand, to set the tone, to make sure that everyone in the audience knew who was in control of that stage. It was a beautiful thing to see. But I'm even more excited about the opportunities for her to lead as president of the United States.
And VP Harris called for a second debate with Trump. He was rejecting that call at the last report. If the VP did as well as you suggest, why risk a second debate?
Well, no, I don't think it's in Trump's interest at all to have a second debate. And in fact, I think that some will agree that the other night on the stage, it was senior citizens abuse, the way that she handled him on that stage. And it also showed what it is to have a senior person of his age being a step behind, a bit slower, seemed to be a bit befuddled and confused from time to time. And when that happens with Donald Trump, what we find is that he reverts back to very lowbrow name calling and even coming up with these conspiracy theories about folks getting their cats and dogs eaten by immigrants who are coming to the United States.
And let's talk about momentum. The Harris campaign claims she still has plenty of it. Are Mississippi Democrats truly motivated for this election?
Well, I had the great benefit of actually attending our DNC, which was in Chicago a few weeks ago, and seeing that exciting and enigmatic convention. It seemed that she already had won. That's how intense and how well planned the DNC was. So we're translating that energy back to the state of Mississippi, where we got folks who are riled up, ready to go, don't knock, make sure that they're doing text messages. We have many apparatuses to help people get involved. And more often than not, when we reach out, we're getting positive and excitement, positive messaging and positive excitement as far as folks who are willing to help out and make sure that she becomes our next president of the United States.
And we know VP Harris has some criticism for her recent policy shifts in years on fracking, for instance, in single-payer health care. Should Mississippi believe what she says now as opposed to what she said then?
Well, I'm taking her for a word. And, you know, Muhammad Ali had a famous quote that basically said, if I have the same mentality that I did 20 years ago, I have not grown at all. What she was able to do is to look at where she was 4 years ago with her stance. But one thing that she said was very important, that her morals have not changed. And in leadership, that is extremely important. And that's why many of us are having such a tough time with Donald Trump with the number of felonies that he has, his criminal background, his character is on display. And a lot of people are saying that that's not who we want to lead. But with Kamala Harris, who will be our future president, we know that she is mature enough, savvy enough, and also honest enough to own up to any type of change in her policy. And I appreciate her doing that.
And let's shift to Mississippi politics. We have our U.S. Senate race in November. The Democrats have Ty Pinkins on the ticket against GOP Senator Roger Wicker, the incumbent, who is heavily favored. How does Ty Pinkins win this race in your point of view?
Well, Ty Pinkins is an excellent candidate. Ty Pinkins is, as far as I've heard and being in the Democratic Party and across the state, is one of those candidates, a lifetime candidate. You know, he's an attorney, graduated from the Georgetown School of Law, military veteran, 3 tours of duty, and so on and so forth. The author came back home to sue for Black farmers in the Delta and won. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime candidate we definitely need to throw our support behind so we can actually get more help on the federal level. Now, having said that, his path to victory will be tied to that of our Vice President Kamala Harris. All ships rise in high tide, and so does Ty Pinkins in this race.
And he has complained about he hasn't gotten support from the National Party organization. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know specifically. I have not talked to Ty in the last few weeks. What I do know is that the state party is steadily working with the DNC to help secure additional funding for Ty Pinkins. I also know that he still has a lot of great support around the state, and that he's our candidate to win. It is our obligation as a Democratic Party to support candidates up and down the ticket, and that's what we're doing on the state level.
And how well would you say the state Democratic Party is able to support Ty Pinkins?
Well, it's how you define support. As the reporter laid out a few weeks ago, that state parties are not necessarily the business of doling out money to candidates. What we do provide, infrastructure, we do provide messaging. There are a myriad things that we provide, but it's not necessarily cash. When we can and when we can be influential in doing so, we make sure we do so. But there are a ton of people who've helped fundraise, there are a ton of people who've encouraged and also attended these events, hosted events in his name. So I'm confident that this discourse or this confusion is behind us very quickly.
And let's briefly look at 2025. You continue in your role as state representative for District 38 in Northeast Mississippi. What are your priorities heading into the 2025 legislative session?
Well, legislatively, our work is still in front of us with Medicaid expansion. Our work is still in front of us when it comes to a clean ballot initiative. Our work is still in front of us when it comes to PERS. So there's plenty of meat on the bone to discuss as far as, and also economic development is a huge part of what we do as state legislators. I just actually attended one here in Starkville in my district, where we put somewhere around $18 million on 182 to encourage economic development, to encourage this relationship between Mississippi State and also the city of Starkville, and to continue to make sure that Starkville is one of the best small towns of the nation. So there are a lot of things we should be working on. But I will say this: in North Mississippi, where I am, Northeast Mississippi, we feel that we're better off than a lot of folks in the state because we do have relationships with leadership, and we're willing to speak up for our people.
So any thoughts on the various tax reconstruction initiatives being pushed by Republican leadership?
Well, what we do know is that the tax policies that Tate Reeves is pushing was warned against from economic advisors from the state of Mississippi. In fact, I was in various meetings where they clearly said that if we did nothing, it would be better than implementing this bad tax plan. As you know, once you have tax cuts, you have to figure out where to get the money from. Right now, we're in the surplus in the state of Mississippi. We are. That surplus has come from federal funding, from folks like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and also folks like Congressman Benny Thompson. So let's be clear at the surpluses here because there is a lack in the state of Mississippi when it came from infrastructure, when it came to also roads and bridges. So we know that there are things that has to be done. But I do not believe that this particular tax cut that my Republican counterparts are talking about will benefit middle-class Americans here in the state of Mississippi.
And that pretty much wraps it up. But anything you would like to say to the Democrats in Mississippi heading into November?
For any Democrat listening, for any independent listening, for any Republican listening, and new voters, if you want to really use your voice, vote. And vote for Kamala Harris because we know that under her we're stronger. We have more protections, especially for our daughters. And we also know that economically, Mississippi will continue on this trajectory, this positive trajectory that we're on right now.
If you have comments or questions about Tuesday's show or suggestions for an interview or a segment, just drop us a line. Email our producers. The address is news@WJTV.com. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.